Captain Juan Park stood on the bridge of the ESS Defender, Earth's most advanced warship. The massive vessel represented humanity's greatest achievement in space exploration, combining military power with scientific discovery capabilities. As the flagship of Earth's small but growing interstellar fleet, the Defender carried the best crew humanity could offer. Juan studied the strange readings on her command console with intense focus. The past few days had been routine, surveying the outer regions of human-explored space, until this unusual signal appeared. Lieutenant Hannah Kim, the ship's communications officer, had been working tirelessly to analyze it. "Captain, I finally isolated the transmission," Hannah said, looking up from her station. Dark circles under her eyes revealed her lack of sleep. "It's definitely not human in origin." The bridge fell silent. First contact protocols had been established years ago, but no human ship had yet encountered true alien intelligence. Several crew members exchanged nervous glances. "How can you be certain?" Juan asked, her voice calm despite the tension building inside her. Hannah pointed to her display. "The signal uses frequencies and patterns unlike anything in our database. It repeats in cycles of 17, not 10 like human systems typically do. And there's something else." She hesitated. "It has emotional markers built into the transmission itself." Juan brushed a strand of black hair from her face, her decision already forming. "Play it." Hannah nodded and pressed several controls on her console. The bridge speakers came to life with an otherworldly sound that made several crew members shift uncomfortably. The noise was both beautiful and unsettling. Musical tones that seemed to flow like water, but structured with precise mathematical patterns. It reminded Juan of whale songs she had once heard on Earth, but far more complex and clearly artificial. Most striking was the unmistakable sense of urgency and fear encoded within the sounds themselves. "Science Officer Taiho, your analysis?" Juan asked, turning to the ship's lead scientist. Tahoe Lee looked up from his station where multiple screens displayed complex data streams. Unlike many science officers who preferred lab work, Tahoe had requested bridge duty during this mission. His instincts had proven correct. "It's a distress call, Captain," he said, eyes wide with excitement despite the situation. "My translation algorithms are still processing, but I've identified repeated markers that identify the senders as a species calling themselves the Ethery." Tahoe touched his screen, bringing up visual representations of the sound patterns. "They're under attack by something they call the Void Swarm. From what I can determine, it's a serious threat, possibly extinction level." The bridge grew even quieter. The implications were enormous. Not only confirmation of intelligent alien life, but two different species, one apparently threatening the other's existence. Navigation Officer Chunho spoke up from his station. "Captain, I've triangulated the signal's origin. It's coming from a star system approximately 12 light days from our position." Juan didn't hesitate. "Plot a course. Maximum speed." "Aye, Captain," Chunho replied, his fingers flying across his console. "Course plotted. Estimated arrival in 36 hours at maximum sustained FTL." "Execute," Juan ordered, then stood from her command chair. "Senior officers, briefing room in 20 minutes. Lieutenant Hannah, continue working on that translation. I want to know everything possible before we arrive." As the bridge crew returned to their duties with renewed focus, Juan stepped into her private ready room adjacent to the bridge. She needed a moment to process this development. First contact scenarios had been simulated countless times during her training, but never like this, never responding to a plea for help. Juan activated her personal comm. "Dr. Minjay to the briefing room in 20 minutes. The ship's xenobiologist would be essential for this mission." She made several more calls, assembling her top specialists. 20 minutes later, the Defender's senior officers gathered around the large table in the briefing room. The ship continued at maximum FTL speed toward the source of the distress call, while Juan outlined what they knew. "The signal contains extensive data beyond the distress call," Tahoe explained, displaying complex charts on the room's main screen. The Ethery included information about themselves: biological, technological, and cultural markers. They wanted whoever received this to know who they are. "Could it be a trap?" asked Security Chief Suman, her face set in a perpetual frown. "Luring us in with a fake distress call." Dr. Minjay, the ship's lanky xenobiologist, shook his head. "The biological data seems genuine. The Ethery appear to be oxygen brothers with carbon-based biology, though with significant differences from Earth life. Why include such detailed information if the goal is simply to trap us?" More importantly, Tahoe added, "the signal contains markers suggesting they've been observing humanity for some time. They specifically targeted this message to be recognizable to humans." This revelation sent a ripple of unease through the room. Strategic Officer Dongwon, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "Captain, I must voice my concerns," he said, his deep voice carrying authority from years of military service. "We're the only Earth vessel in this sector. If we engage with an unknown hostile force, we risk not only this ship but potentially exposing Earth to a new threat. First contact protocols recommend caution and observation before intervention." Several officers nodded in agreement. Juan understood their concerns. The ESS Defender carried the most advanced weapon systems humanity had developed, but they had never been tested against alien technology. They were heading into completely unknown territory. "Your concerns are noted, Officer Dongwon," Juan replied firmly. "But this isn't just first contact. It's a distress call." She looked around the table, meeting each officer's eyes. "Throughout human history, we've established one principle above all others when venturing into dangerous territory. We answer distress calls. It's what humans do." She stood up and walked to the display showing the Ethery signal patterns. These beings reached out across space asking for help. They're facing extinction. If we ignore that call, what does that say about humanity's place among the stars? Medical Officer Yuri spoke up. "Captain's right. Our medical oaths extend to all life forms. If they're suffering, we have a duty to help if we can. We proceed with caution," Juan continued. "Full defensive posture upon arrival. But we will answer this call." She turned to Dr. Minjay. "I want first contact protocols ready. Tahoe, continue refining that translation. Dongwon, prepare defensive scenarios." Dismissed. As the officers filed out, Juan remained behind, studying the alien transmission. The fate of the ESS Defender, and possibly Earth's first steps into the galactic community, now rested on her decisions. Her superiors had chosen her to command Earth's flagship because of her balanced approach to exploration and security. Now that judgment would be tested. The sound of the Ethery distress call still echoed in her mind. Beautiful, alien, and desperate. Whatever waited for them at the end of this journey, Juan knew humanity would face it as they had faced all great challenges, with courage, compassion, and unwavering resolve. The ESS Defender dropped out of FTL speed with a flash of light, its massive engines powering down as the ship entered normal space. On the bridge, the crew stared in silent awe at the view on the main screen. Before them hung a planet that might once have been beautiful. Now it resembled a cracked jewel, its surface scarred with dark patches visible even from orbit. What had clearly been magnificent cities now stood as partial ruins. Faint blue shields flickered weakly around several large population centers, their power clearly failing. Sensors show massive destruction across the planet's surface, Science Officer Tahoe reported, his voice hushed. Signs of recent orbital bombardment. Radiation signatures unlike anything in our database. Captain Juan Park gripped the arms of her command chair. This was worse than they had anticipated. Life signs. Concentrated in those shielded areas, Tahoe confirmed. Several million individuals, but the readings are unusual. Their biology is different. Captain, Lieutenant Hannah called from her communication station. They're hailing us. Juan nodded, straightening her uniform. On screen. The main view screen shifted from the damaged planet to a figure that made several crew members gasp. The being before them was tall and slender, with a body that seemed to be made of flowing light. Its features shifted constantly like rippling water, but maintained a vaguely humanoid shape with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Where a human would have eyes, this being had swirling pools of blue-green energy. "I am Emissary Jinwoo of the Ethery High Council," came a melodic voice as the ship's translation systems processed the alien language. "You have come. After centuries of observation, our calculations suggested humans might respond to our plea." Juwon tried to hide her surprise at both the alien's appearance and its words. "Centuries of observation." She gestured to her diplomatic officer. Minji stepped forward, her training taking over despite her obvious awe. "Greetings, Emissary Jinwoo. I am Diplomatic Officer Minji from the Earth Spaceship Defender. We received your distress call and came to help." The luminous being's form rippled with what appeared to be emotion, perhaps relief. "The Void Swarm comes. We track their movements. They will return to finish what they started within 14 of your Earth days." The being's light dimmed slightly. "We have technology, knowledge, but lack your species' remarkable adaptability. Your ship, it contains weapons." Captain Juwon stood from her chair and moved beside Minji. "The ESS Defender is Earth's flagship," she said simply. "We'll help defend your world." The alien's form brightened noticeably. "Then there may yet be hope. We request your presence on our world, Captain. There is much to discuss and little time." After the transmission ended, the bridge erupted with questions and concerns. Security Chief Suman immediately voiced her objections. "Captain, we don't know enough about these beings. Going to the surface could be dangerous." "They've been watching us for centuries," Strategic Officer Dongwon added. "Yet they chose only now to make contact." Juwon raised her hand for silence. "They're facing extinction. That's why they reached out now." She turned to her science officer. "Taho, what do we know about these Void Swarm attackers?" Taho shook his head. "Very little from the sensor readings. The radiation patterns suggest extremely advanced weapons technology, far beyond Earth capabilities." "Then we need to learn more," Juwon decided. "I'll lead the away team to the surface." 4 hours later, Juwon stood with a small team in the Defender's teleportation chamber. She had selected Minji for diplomatic expertise, Taho for scientific analysis, and Security Officer Hyunsu for protection. All wore the standard away team gear: lightweight armor, emergency breathing masks, and small sidearms. Coordinates locked on their governmental center. The transport officer confirmed. "Bioscanners show the atmosphere is compatible with human life." "Energize," Juwon ordered. The familiar tingles of the teleportation beam enveloped them, and seconds later they materialized in a vast chamber unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls appeared to be made of some crystalline substance that glowed with inner light, changing colors subtly as they watched. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above them, supported by graceful columns that seemed impossibly thin. Several Ethery waited for them, their luminous bodies casting additional light throughout the room. Up close, the aliens were even more striking, their forms constantly shifting yet somehow maintaining distinct identities. Juwon could now see patterns in the light that made each one unique. Emissary Jinwoo approached, accompanied by several others who seemed to radiate different colors and intensities. "Captain Juwon, welcome to Etheria. These are members of our High Council." Each council member bowed in a gesture clearly adapted from human customs. Juwon and her team returned the gesture. "We thank you for your hospitality," Minji said formally. "But we understand time is short. Tell us about the threat you face." The Ethery led them to what appeared to be a conference area, where 3-dimensional images suddenly appeared in the air between them. "The Void Swarm," Jinwoo explained as the image showed dark, angular ships moving in perfect formation. "They appeared in our system 104 days ago without warning. We had no defense prepared. Our society has been peaceful for millennia." The images shifted to show the attack. Dozens of black ships raining destruction on the beautiful Ethery cities. The buildings, which appeared to be made of the same crystalline material as this chamber, shattered under the assault. Why did they attack you? Hansu asked, his security training evident in his directness. They consume, another council member answered, her voice deeper than Jinwoo's. Resources, technology, energy, all are taken. They do not communicate or negotiate. They simply take. Tahoe studied the images with scientific fascination. Your defenses. The shields we observed from orbit. Hastily created, Jinwoo admitted. We are scientists, philosophers, artists, not warriors. We had theoretical knowledge of protective technology, but had never needed to implement it. The shields will not withstand another assault. Why did they leave? Juwon asked. If they had the advantage, why not finish the attack? The council members exchanged glances. They operate in cycles, Jinwoo explained. They attack, then retreat to process what they've taken. But they always return. Juwon nodded, considering this information. And why reach out to humans specifically? You mentioned centuries of observation. At this, the Ethery Council's lights dimmed slightly, as if embarrassed. We have observed many species as they reached for the stars. Most, like us, developed technologically, but became peaceful, even complacent. Humans were different. Different how? Minji asked. Unpredictable, Jinwoo said. Adaptable. Creative in ways we struggle to understand. Where we see order, you see possibilities. Where we would retreat, you advance. The alien's form shifted. You build ships with both scientific instruments and powerful weapons. You explore, but you also defend. This combination is rare among spacefaring species. Juwon considered this carefully, understanding the implications. You need our help because we still remember how to fight. Yes, Jinwoo admitted. Our calculations gave humans the highest probability of responding to our distress call with aid, rather than exploitation or indifference. And you have come, just as we hoped. Tahoe stepped forward eagerly. Your technology, even damage, it's clearly advanced beyond our own. Perhaps in exchange. Your knowledge for our military assistance. That is our hope, Jinwoo confirmed. We have already prepared information transfers for your ship. Our technology in energy manipulation, material science, and biological enhancement could benefit humanity for centuries to come. And in return, we help you fight off these void swarm attackers, Juwon stated. It wasn't a question. Yes. Will you help us, Captain Juwon Park of Earth? Juwon looked around at the beautiful but damaged city visible through large windows, then back at her team. Minji nodded slightly. Taiho's eyes were wide with excitement at the prospect of new scientific knowledge. Even Security Officer Hyunsu seemed moved by the Ethery's plight. The ESS Defender stands ready to help, Juwon said firmly. Let's get to work. We have 14 days to prepare for war. Chief Engineer Sunwoo stood in the Ethery Central Laboratory, his eyes wide with wonder. The room stretched around him in a perfect circle, with dozens of workstations that seemed to float in midair. Ethery scientists moved gracefully between these stations, their glowing bodies casting shifting patterns of light across the polished floor. This power conversion efficiency is incredible, Sunwoo whispered as he examined a small device no larger than his palm. It hummed softly, generating enough energy to power an entire deck of the Defender. If we integrate this with our weapons systems. Beside him, an Ethery scientist named Daehyun nodded, his form rippling with what humans had learned to recognize as excitement. After 5 days of working together, the two species were finally beginning to understand each other's communication styles. Our energy technology evolved over thousands of years, Daehyun explained. We focused on efficiency and sustainability rather than offensive capabilities. Sunwoo turned the device over in his hands. Meanwhile, humans spent centuries figuring out better ways to blow things up. He grinned. Now we get to combine our specialties. Across the room, Captain Juan watched the exchange with satisfaction. The past 5 days had been a whirlwind of activity as both sides raced against time. The Void Swarm would return in just 9 more days according to Ethery calculations. Your engineers adapt quickly, Emissary Jinwoo commented, standing beside her. His luminous form had become a familiar sight to the human crew. Necessity drives innovation, Juan replied. It always has for humans. They walked together through the laboratory, passing workstations where human and Ethery scientists worked side by side. At each station, elements of both technologies were being combined in ways neither species had imagined before. Your security chief has been particularly insightful, Jinwoo noted as they approached another section of the lab. Security Chief Ji-hoon stood before a large tactical display with So-yeon, the Ethery defense coordinator. The display showed recordings of previous Void Swarm attacks, their ships moving in perfect, geometric formations. The swarm attacks in predictable patterns. Ji-hoon asked, studying the movements carefully. Always, So-yeon confirmed. Her form glowed a steady blue, her voice calm and measured. They are perfect in their logic. Each attack follows mathematical progressions we can predict, but cannot counter effectively. Ji-hoon smiled grimly. Humans are not so logical. That's our advantage. He reached out and rearranged the defender's position in the simulation, placing it where no logical tactician would consider. They expect defenders to protect vital infrastructure first, population centers second. What if we don't follow that pattern? What if we appear to abandon key positions, only to strike from unexpected angles? So-yeon's form flickered with uncertainty. Such a strategy contradicts optimal defense protocols. Exactly, Ji-hoon said. The swarm won't expect it. Their perfect logic becomes their weakness against human unpredictability. Ji-won and Jinwoo continued their tour, moving to a medical section where Dr. Yuri worked with Ethery biologists. They had discovered fascinating differences between human and Ethery physiology. The Ethery bodies were composed of organized energy within a containment field that they generated naturally. Captain, Science Officer Teo called out, rushing toward them from another section of the laboratory. His face was flushed with excitement. We've made a critical discovery. Tahoe led them to his workstation where complex neural pattern displays flickered across screens. We were studying Void Swarm communication patterns from the data the Ethery collected. Look what happens when we introduce human neural patterns. He pressed a button, and the ordered patterns on the screen suddenly dissolved into chaos. Human neural patterns create disruption in the swarm's communication network, Tahoe explained, pointing to the display. Our brains work differently, more chaotically, more creatively. This electromagnetic signature actually interferes with their hive-mind connection. Ji-won's eyes widened as she understood the implications. Then we have a chance, if we can amplify this effect. Exactly. Tahoe nodded enthusiastically. We're already working on a device that could broadcast human neural patterns on a large scale. It could disrupt their coordination during battle. Emissary Jinwoo's form brightened considerably. This is why we hoped humans would answer our call. You see solutions where we see only problems. Over the next few days, work continued at a frantic pace. In the ship's hangar bay, human engineers were modifying the Defender's shuttlecraft with Ethery energy technology, turning them into small but powerful attack vessels. Weapon systems that once drained massive power were now twice as effective at half the energy cost. The Ethery watched in fascination as the humans worked, arguing, laughing, improvising. Their chaotic energy unlike anything the aliens had witnessed before. Where Ethery worked methodically and in silence, humans shouted ideas across rooms, sketched plans on any available surface, and sometimes vehemently disagreed before finding better solutions together. They argue constantly, one Ethery scientist named Mincio observed to Jinwoo. Yet they produce results faster than we ever could. Jinwoo's form pulsed in agreement. Their chaos generates creativity. It is their greatest strength. In the command center, Captain Juan met with her senior officers to review their battle plan. The large table displayed a holographic map of the Ethery system, with projected void swarm entry points marked in red. The neural disruptor will be our primary advantage, Tahoe explained to the group. But its range is limited. We'll need to get close to their command vessels. That's where our modified shuttles come in, Sungu added. They're faster and more maneuverable than anything we've built before. The Ethery shielding technology makes them nearly invisible to sensors. Strategic Officer Dongwon looked skeptical. We're still outnumbered at least 20-1 based on previous attack patterns. Numbers aren't everything, Security Chief Ji-hoon countered. The swarm has never encountered human battle tactics. They won't expect our level of improvisation. Lieutenant Hana, who had been quietly working with Ethery communications experts, spoke up. We've also developed a way to feed false information into their network. If the neural disruptor works, we can transmit conflicting orders to their ships. Juan nodded, impressed with her crew's innovations. What about the Ethery population centers? Their shields won't hold against another full attack. That's our biggest concern, Minji admitted. We can't defend all 7 remaining cities simultaneously. Juan studied the map thoughtfully. Then we don't try to. We consolidate. Move everyone to the 3 largest shield generators. Combine power from the abandoned shields to strengthen the remaining ones. The Ethery Council may resist, Minji warned. They're very attached to their ancestral cities. Then make them understand, Juan said firmly. This is survival, not sentiment. Later that evening, Juan stood on a balcony overlooking the largest Ethery city. Unlike human cities with their rigid structures, Ethery architecture flowed like their bodies, buildings rising in graceful curves that seemed to defy gravity. Even damaged by the previous attack, it was breathtakingly beautiful. Emissary Jinwoo joined her, his light dimmer than usual, suggesting fatigue or worry. Your council agreed to the evacuation plan? Juan asked. Yes, Jinwoo confirmed, though with great reluctance. Some of those cities have stood for thousands of years. They can be rebuilt, Juan said gently, if we survive. Jinwoo's form brightened slightly. Before you came, survival seemed impossible. Now there is hope. He paused, his light shifting to a deeper blue. Whatever happens, Captain Juan, know that the Ethery will remember Earth's response to our call. You did not hesitate to help strangers across the stars. Juan nodded, watching the sun set over the alien horizon, painting the crystal buildings in gold and purple light. In less than a week, this beautiful world would become a battlefield. The ESS Defender, Earth's flagship, would face an enemy unlike anything humans had encountered before. But they would not face it alone. Human and Ethery, 2 vastly different species, had formed an alliance that combined the best qualities of both. Together, they had a chance, perhaps their only chance, against the approaching void swarm. The alarm sounded throughout the ESS Defender, its urgent wail pulling crew members from uneasy sleep to battle stations. Captain Juan Park rushed onto the bridge, her uniform hastily fastened, to find her night crew already at their posts. Report, she demanded, sliding into her command chair. Lieutenant Hana's fingers flew across her communications panel. Her voice cut through the tension on the bridge. Swarm vessels entering the system. Massive energy signatures at the outer boundary. They're earlier than predicted. Tactical displays lit up across the bridge as the enemy fleet materialized from FTL travel. The black ships of the Void Swarm emerged in perfect formation, dozens at first, then hundreds, their angular shapes resembling obsidian knives against the blackness of space. Juan stood, her face set with determination. Battle stations, deploy fighters. Throughout the massive ship, crew members hurried to their positions. In the launch bay, pilots climbed into modified shuttlecraft, their engines humming with Ethery power technology. Chief Engineer Sunwoo gave final instructions through their communication system. Remember, these aren't the fighters you trained in, he warned. They're twice as responsive and 3 times as powerful. Don't overcorrect. On the planet below, The Ethery washed from their 3 remaining cities, huddled behind strengthened shields. The evacuation had been completed just hours earlier, leaving 4 of their ancient cities abandoned but their populations safer behind the reinforced defenses. The ESA Defender moved away from its orbital position, engines flaring as it accelerated toward the approaching enemy. Behind it, 20 fighter craft deployed in an irregular pattern that no tactical computer would recommend. The formation looked chaotic, almost random, exactly as planned. Swarm vessels are maintaining standard attack formation, Strategic Officer Dongwen reported. They haven't adjusted to our positioning. Good, Juan nodded. They still think we'll behave logically. She touched her communication panel. All fighters, execute pattern chaos. Defender will engage main force. The human fighters broke formation, each taking independent trajectories that seemed to have no coordination. To the hive mind of the Void Swarm, it appeared as dangerous inefficiency. To the human pilots, it was controlled unpredictability. Their primary advantage. The ESS Defender moved like a dancer among the stars, its enhanced engines allowing maneuvers that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. The swarm's perfect calculations failed to predict the flagship's movements as it accelerated directly toward the center of their formation. Weapons range in 30 seconds, Security Chief Ji-hoon announced from tactical control. Energy levels at maximum. Ji-won leaned forward in her chair. Target their lead vessels and fire at will. The Defender's newly enhanced weapons systems came to life, streams of energy tearing through space. Where once the ship's weapons would have depleted its reserves quickly, the Ethery power conversion technology kept them firing at full strength. The first wave of swarm attackers disappeared in brilliant explosions. On the view screen, the fighter craft darted between larger enemy vessels, their erratic movements making them nearly impossible to target. Each fighter struck at the swarm ship's vulnerable points, identified through careful study of previous battle recordings. It's working, Tahoe exclaimed, watching the sensor readings. The swarm's formation is breaking down. They can't maintain their attack patterns against our unpredictability. For several minutes, the battle seemed to tilt in humanity's favor. The bridge crew allowed themselves cautious smiles as enemy vessels continued to fall to their enhanced weaponry. Then the tide turned. Captain, the swarm is adapting, Dongwen warned, his voice tense. They're adjusting their algorithms to account for our random patterns. On the tactical display, the black ships began to move differently, breaking their perfect formations to counter the human attacks. 3 fighters disappeared from the screen in quick succession as they were caught in overlapping enemy fire. Recall fighters to defensive positions, Juan ordered. Concentrate our fire on their flagship. The massive swarm command vessel had remained in the rear of the formation until now. As the battle shifted, it moved forward, its size dwarfing even the Defender. Energy readings from the vessel spiked dramatically. Massive energy surge building in the lead vessel, Tahoe shouted, eyes fixed on his console. They're charging their main weapon. Juwan's tactical display showed the projected path of the energy weapon. They're targeting the Ethery capital. She realized, seeing that the weapon would bypass their battle entirely and strike at the planet's largest remaining city. Intercept course, maximum speed, Juwan ordered without hesitation. Navigation Officer Chuno looked up in shock. Captain, if we position ourselves in that weapon's path. I know the risks, Juwan cut him off. Position us between them and the planet. Captain, Hana began, her face pale. Do it, Juwan said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. The Defender's engines flared as it abandoned its offensive position, racing to place itself between the swarm flagship and the Ethery homeworld. The crew worked frantically, diverting power to forward shields. 5 seconds to weapon discharge. Ji-hoon counted down. 4, 3, 2. All hands brace for impact, Juwan shouted. The swarm weapon fired, a massive beam of concentrated energy that streaked across space toward the planet. Instead, it struck the Defender's reinforced shields. The entire ship shuddered violently. Consoles exploded across the bridge, throwing crew members from their stations. Emergency lights flashed as primary power failed. Jiwan picked herself up from the floor where she'd been thrown. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. Damage report. Engineering reports flooded in from all decks. The Defender had survived, but barely. Systems failed across the ship as energy surges overloaded circuits despite the Ethery improvements. Shields at 12%. Jihoon reported grimly. Weapons offline. Life support functioning on emergency power. The Ethery city. Jiwan demanded. Tahoe checked his sensors. Intact. Their shields held. The victory was short-lived. On the tactical display, the swarm vessels regrouped, preparing for another attack. With the Defender crippled, there would be no stopping the next assault. "They're coming around for another pass," Dongwon warned. Meanwhile, far from the main battle, Lieutenant Kyung-ho led a small infiltration team in one of the Ethery-enhanced shuttles. Their mission had been planned as a desperate last resort: to approach the swarm command node undetected and deploy the neural disruptor device. The shuttle's new stealth technology had allowed them to slip past the swarm's outer defenses during the confusion of battle. Now they hovered near the massive flagship, watching as it prepared to fire again on the Defender. Inside the cramped shuttle, Kyung-ho looked at his team: 2 human engineers and an Ethery scientist named Jin-young, whose luminous form was dimmed to avoid detection. "The Defender won't survive another hit," Engineer Minna said quietly, watching the tactical display. Kyung-ho nodded grimly. "Then we have no choice." He checked the neural disruptor device, a small cylinder containing recordings of human brain patterns, amplified and modified to broadcast on frequencies that would disrupt the swarm's hive-mind connection. "The device must be placed directly on their central processing node," Jin-young reminded them. "Our scans indicate it's here." He pointed to a section near the center of the massive vessel. "That means we have to dock with the swarm flagship," Kyung-ho said, "without being detected." The team exchanged solemn looks. The mission had always been considered near suicide, but now it was their only option. "For Earth and Etheria," Kyung-ho said simply, guiding the shuttle toward a maintenance port they had identified on the swarm vessel. As the shuttle made its approach, Kyung-ho activated his communication link to the Defender. "Captain, Infiltration Team Alpha approaching target. Preparing for neural disruptor deployment." Through static and interference, Jiwan's voice came through. "Understood, Lieutenant. The Defender will create a diversion. Good luck." Despite its damaged state, the ESS Defender fired its remaining operational thrusters, moving to engage the swarm vessels once more. The brave action drew attention away from the small shuttle as it docked with the enemy flagship. Kyung-ho and his team moved quickly through the alien vessel, encountering strange technology and automated defense systems. The swarm ships appeared to have no crew, only machines controlled by the central hive mind. Finally, they reached the central chamber where pulsing energy indicated the location of the command node. As automated defenses activated around them, Kyung-ho reached for the neural disruptor. "Now or never," he whispered, activating the device. The neural disruptor hummed to life, broadcasting chaotic human thought patterns throughout the swarm network. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, throughout the enemy fleet, confusion spread like wildfire. The gentle hum of repair tools filled the air as Captain Jiwan Park stood at the large observation window of Deck 12. 3 weeks had passed since the battle against the Void Swarm. The ESS Defender floated in orbit above the Ethery homeworld, its hull still bearing the scars of combat. Outside, repair crews in spacesuits worked methodically to fix the ship's damaged exterior. Some were human crew members, while others were Ethery technicians, their luminous bodies glowing even through their special work suits. Jiwan's reflection in the window showed a tired woman. Dark circles remained under her eyes, and a healing cut crossed her forehead where she had been injured during the battle. But there was also pride in her stance as she watched the repairs progressing. The neural disruptor had worked better than anyone had expected. When Lieutenant Kyung-ho activated the device in the heart of the swarm flagship, the effect had been immediate and devastating. The perfect coordination of the enemy fleet collapsed into chaos. Ships collided with each other, weapons fired randomly, and defensive systems failed. The remaining human fighters had seized the opportunity, targeting key systems across the confused fleet. Most importantly, the command ship itself had shut down completely, its central intelligence unable to process the chaotic human neural patterns flooding its network. The Void Swarm, for the first time in its known history, had retreated in disarray. Kyung-ho and his team had barely escaped the command ship before it went offline. Their shuttle, damaged during the escape, had limped back to the Defender, where they received a hero's welcome despite their injuries. "Captain," a soft voice called, interrupting Ji-won's thoughts. She turned to see Diplomatic Officer Minji approaching, her uniform crisp and perfect as always. Unlike most of the crew, Minji somehow managed to look fresh and composed even after the past 3 weeks of intense activity. "The Ethery Council wishes to present you and the crew with their highest honor," Minji announced with a smile. "The Celestial Light, awarded only 5 times in their entire history. They want to hold a formal ceremony tomorrow." Ji-won smiled slightly. "Tell them the alliance between our peoples is honor enough." Minji chuckled. "I already tried that. They insist. Apparently, refusing would be considered disrespectful to their traditions." She moved to stand beside her captain at the window. "Besides, the crew deserves recognition for what they accomplished." They stood in comfortable silence, watching a team of engineers guiding a large replacement panel into position on the hull. Human and Ethery worked together seamlessly now, their initial awkwardness replaced by mutual respect and even friendship. "Earth Central Command is sending a diplomatic fleet," Minji added after a moment. "They'll arrive within 2 months to formalize the alliance and provide additional resources for reconstruction." She looked at Ji-won with genuine admiration. "We've changed the galaxy, Captain." Ji-won considered this. When the Defender had first detected the Ethery distress signal, none of them could have imagined how dramatically their mission would expand. Humanity had made first contact with not 1 but 2 alien species, fought an interstellar battle, and established what would likely become their most important alliance in space. "How is the planet's reconstruction going?" Ji-won asked, changing the subject. "Better than expected," Minji replied. "The Ethery are returning to their abandoned cities now that the threat is gone. With our help, they've already restored power to 2 of them. Chief Engineer Sunwoo says the combined human-Ethery technology is creating better infrastructure than either of us had before." Ji-won nodded, satisfied. "And the data on the Void Swarm? Science Officer Taeho and his Ethery counterparts are still analyzing everything we learned. They believe the swarm will eventually recover from the neural disruption, but it will take them time to adapt their hive mind against our technique." Minji's expression grew more serious. "They're already working on more advanced versions of the disruptor for the next encounter." "There will be a next time," Ji-won said with certainty. It wasn't a question. "Most likely. But next time, we'll be better prepared. And we won't be alone." Minji gestured to the planet below. "The Ethery are already discussing converting some of their scientific facilities to defense production. With their technology and our tactical experience." She didn't need to finish the thought. The combined strength of humans and Ethery would present a much more formidable defense. A small shuttlecraft passed by the observation window, heading toward the planet's surface. It carried Lieutenant Kyung-ho and his team for a well-deserved shore leave. The young officer had become something of a celebrity among both humans and Ethery for his bravery during the mission. "I received Kyung-ho's report this morning," Ji-won said. "He's formally requesting a permanent posting as liaison to the Ethery Defense Force they're establishing." "He'd be perfect for it," Minji agreed. Several other crew members have made similar requests, and many Ethery have expressed interest in serving aboard Earth vessels. Ji-won smiled more fully this time. "An exchange program. I think Earth Central will approve." They were interrupted by the arrival of emissary Jinwoo, whose luminous form had become a familiar sight aboard the Defender. The Ethery diplomat approached with the flowing movement characteristic of his species. "Captain Juan," he greeted her. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all, emissary," Juan replied warmly. "How can I help you?" "I wish to show you something, if you would accompany me to the surface," Jinwoo said. "It is a surprise." An hour later, Juan found herself standing in the central plaza of the Ethery capital city. The damage from the Void Swarm attack was still visible in many buildings, but remarkable progress had been made in repairs. Ethery moved through the streets, their bodies glowing with brighter light than when the Defender had first arrived. A sign of improved morale, she had learned. Jinwoo led her to a large clearing where dozens of Ethery workers were busy constructing something massive. As they approached, Juan realized it was a monument, and her breath caught when she recognized the shape taking form. It was the ESS Defender, rendered in the crystal-like material the Ethery used for their most important structures. The monument would be enormous when completed, at least 50 meters long. On the Ethery homeworld, a new monument is being constructed, Jinwoo explained formally. A representation of the ESS Defender, the ship that came when all hope seemed lost, carrying the most unexpected and remarkable allies in the galaxy. Juan stared at the partially completed monument, momentarily at a loss for words. The crystal structure caught the sunlight, sending rainbow patterns across the plaza. "The monument will serve as both a memorial and a promise," Jinwoo continued, "a reminder of what we can accomplish together." Around the construction site, human crew members on shore leave had gathered to watch, pointing and taking pictures. Several called out greetings to their captain. Nearby, Ethery children, smaller, brighter versions of the adults, played a game that seemed to involve mimicking the movements of the Earth ship during battle. "This is unnecessary, but very touching," Juan finally said, emotion making her voice slightly rough. "Why did you come, Captain?" Jinwoo asked suddenly. "When you received our distress call, you had no obligation to help us. Your superiors did not order you to intervene. You could have simply recorded the existence of our species and continued your mission." Juan watched a mixed team of humans and Ethery carefully positioning a crystal piece that would become the ship's bridge. "We answered a call," she said simply. "That's what humans do." Jinwoo's form brightened noticeably, the Ethery equivalent of a smile. "Perhaps that is why the stars have waited so long for your species to join the greater community. You were needed." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plaza, more people gathered around the monument. Human crew members stood shoulder to shoulder with their Ethery counterparts, former strangers now united by shared struggle and victory. In orbit above them, the ESS Defender continued its repairs, preparing for the journey home to Earth, where it would carry news of humanity's new place in the galaxy, and the message that somewhere among the stars, there were others who needed their help, their courage, and their uniquely human way of facing the unknown. A new chapter had begun, not just for Earth or Etheria, but for the galaxy itself.